We live in an era where words have unprecedented devastating power. With social media, instant messaging, and digital communication, a single ill-intentioned word can spread across the world in a matter of seconds, destroying reputations, relationships, and entire lives. Slander, envy, and malicious tongues have found fertile ground in our hyper-connected society, becoming powerful weapons in the hands of those who wish to cause harm. It is in this context that Psalm 140 gains extraordinary relevance. This ancient biblical text, written by King David over 3,000 years ago, directly and profoundly addresses the challenges faced by those who are targets of verbal attacks, slander, and malicious conspiracies. More than simply expressing pain or frustration, this psalm offers a powerful spiritual response: prayer as a weapon against malicious tongues. Psalm 140 is classified as a psalm of lamentation and supplication, but it also contains elements of confidence and praise. David, experiencing persecution and attacks from enemies who used words as weapons, cries out to God for protection and justice. His words echo through the centuries, offering comfort and direction to all those who face similar situations. The structure of this psalm reveals a fascinating emotional and spiritual progression. It begins with a desperate cry for deliverance, vividly describes the malicious tactics of enemies, presents powerful metaphors about the destructive nature of words, and culminates in declarations of faith and confidence in divine justice. This emotional and spiritual journey offers a model for all those who need to face verbal attacks and slander. Historical context: David and his persecutors. To fully understand the depth and urgency of Psalm 140, it is essential to dive into the historical context that originated it. David lived a life marked by conflicts, persecutions, and constant attempts to destroy his reputation and position. From his early days as a young shepherd to his reign as king of Israel, he faced adversaries who used not only physical weapons but also words as instruments of war. During King Saul's reign, David experienced intense persecution motivated by royal envy. Saul, perceiving that David had divine and popular favor, initiated a systematic campaign to discredit and destroy him. This campaign was not limited to physical persecution. It also included attempts to tarnish his reputation through false accusations, malicious rumors, and manipulation of public opinion. The situation intensified when David became king. He faced internal rebellions, palace conspiracies, and constant attempts to overthrow his government. Many of these attacks began with words, whispers in palace corridors, rumors spread among the people, false accusations presented as truths. David's enemies understood that destroying his credibility was as effective as attacking him militarily. Particularly painful was the rebellion of his own son Absalom, who used propaganda tactics and verbal manipulation to win the hearts of the Israelite people against his father. Absalom stole the hearts of the men of Israel through smooth words and deceptive promises, demonstrating how skillful tongues can be more dangerous than sharp swords. Other episodes from David's life also illustrate his experience with verbal attacks. Shimei publicly cursed him during his flight from Jerusalem in Absalom's rebellion. Nabal insulted him when he asked for provisions for his men. Even in his own home, he faced criticism and contempt from his wife Michal. These experiences gave David intimate knowledge of the pain caused by malicious words. Textual analysis: unveiling the layers of Psalm 140. Psalm 140 is composed of 13 verses that can be divided into several distinct sections, each contributing to the overall theme of protection against malicious enemies and their venomous tongues. Careful analysis of this text reveals deep layers of meaning that transcend the specific historical context. Verses 1 to 3, the initial cry for deliverance. Deliver me, O Lord, from evil men, preserve me from violent men, who plan evil things in their hearts and stir up wars continually. They make their tongue sharp as a serpent's, and under their lips is the venom of asps. The opening of the psalm is an urgent cry for help. David does not simply ask for help, he implores for deliverance. The use of the word deliver indicates a situation of imminent danger. He identifies two types of enemies, the evil man and the violent man. This distinction is significant. Some enemies are malicious by nature, while others are violent in their actions. The metaphor of the serpent to describe malicious tongues is particularly powerful. Serpents were universal symbols of deception and mortal danger in the ancient world. Just as a serpent injects venom through its bite, malicious tongues inject poison through their words. This metaphor suggests that the damage caused by malicious words can be lethal, not necessarily in the physical sense, but certainly emotional, psychological, and spiritual. Verses 4 to 5. Description of enemy tactics. Guard me, O Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Preserve me from violent men who have planned to trip up my feet. The arrogant have hidden a trap for me, and with cords they have spread a net. Beside the way they have set snares for me. These verses reveal the systematic tactics used by David's enemies. They do not only attack openly, they set traps, spread nets, and set snares. These hunting metaphors illustrate how verbal attacks are often carefully planned and executed. Slander and defamation are rarely spontaneous. They are usually part of calculated campaigns to destroy the victim. The image of feet being tripped suggests that the enemy's goal was to divert David from his correct path, to make him stumble morally or spiritually. This reflects a common tactic of verbal attacks, trying to provoke the victim to react inappropriately, thus providing additional ammunition for more attacks. Verses 6 to 8. Declaration of confidence and plea for justice. I say to the Lord, you are my God. Give ear to the voice of my pleas for mercy, O Lord. O Lord, my Lord, the strength of my salvation, you have covered my head in the day of battle. Grant not, O Lord, the desires of the wicked, do not further their evil plot. In the midst of his anguish, David makes a powerful declaration of faith. He proclaims that God is his strength, and remembers past victories when God covered his head in the day of battle. This military reference suggests divine protection during physical conflicts, but can also be interpreted metaphorically as protection during verbal and psychological attacks. The plea for God not to grant the desires of the wicked reveals David's desire for divine justice. He is not simply asking for personal protection. He is asking that the malicious plans of his enemies be frustrated. This is a prayer for the defeat of the forces of evil, not just personal escape. Verses 9 to 11. Invocation of divine justice. As for the head of those who surround me, let the mischief of their lips overwhelm them. Let burning coals fall upon them. Let them be cast into fire, into miry pits, no more to rise. Let not the slanderer be established in the land. Let evil hunt down the violent man speedily. These verses contain some of the strongest language in the psalm. David invokes poetic justice, that the mischief of their own lips destroy his enemies. This reflects a biblical principle that evil words eventually turn against those who speak them. The metaphors of fire and miry pits are images of divine judgment. In Hebrew thought, fire was a symbol of purification and judgment, while pits represented complete destruction. The declaration that the slanderer will not be established in the land is a prophetic affirmation that those who depend on verbal malice to achieve their goals will not have lasting success. Verses 12 to 13. Conclusion with faith and praise. I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted, and will execute justice for the needy. Surely the righteous shall give thanks to your name, the upright shall dwell in your presence. The psalm concludes with a note of triumphant confidence. David expresses absolute certainty that God will defend the oppressed and execute justice. This is not vague hope, it is conviction based on knowledge of the divine character. The promise that the righteous shall give thanks, and the upright shall dwell in the presence of God offers hope not just for escape from suffering, but for complete restoration and divine communion. The weapons of malicious tongues. Understanding the enemy. To effectively use Psalm 140 as a prayer of protection, it is essential to understand the various manifestations of malicious tongues that this psalm combats. The verbal weapons used by spiritual and human enemies are varied and sophisticated, each designed to cause specific types of damage. Slander, destruction of reputation. Slander is perhaps the most direct of verbal weapons. It involves the intentional dissemination of false or distorted information about a person with the goal of damaging their reputation. In David's time, slander spread through personal conversations and public gatherings. Today it can spread instantly through social media, reaching millions of people within hours. Slander is particularly dangerous because it often contains elements of truth mixed with lies, making it difficult to refute completely. Skilled slanderers know how to present distortions of facts in ways that seem plausible, especially to those who already have prejudices against the victim. The psychological impact of slander can be devastating. Victims frequently report feelings of betrayal, social isolation, anxiety, and depression. In extreme cases, slander can lead to job loss, relationship breakdown, and even suicidal ideation. Envy, the bitter root. Envy is often the underlying motivation behind many verbal attacks. When people see others prospering, achieving success, or receiving recognition, Envy can transform into a destructive desire to bring down those who seem to have more. Envy is particularly dangerous because it often disguises itself as legitimate concern or constructive criticism. Envious people can present their attacks as being motivated by justice or moral correction, when they are actually moved by resentment and a desire to see the other fail. In the biblical context, envy is seen as one of the most destructive sins. Cain killed Abel out of envy, Joseph's brothers sold him as a slave out of envy, and religious leaders delivered Jesus to be crucified out of envy. This emotion has the power to transform apparently normal people into relentless adversaries. Gossip, subtle poison. Gossip may seem less malicious than direct slander, but it can be equally destructive. It involves the dissemination of private information, unconfirmed rumors, or speculation presented as facts. Gossip is insidious because it is often shared under the pretext of concern or need for prayer. A particular characteristic of gossip is its ability to grow and distort as it is transmitted. Like the children's game of telephone, information passed from person to person undergoes gradual changes until it becomes completely different from the original truth. Gossip also creates an environment of suspicion and paranoia. When people know that private information is regularly shared, they become cautious in their relationships and less willing to trust each other. Manipulation, distorting perception. Skilled verbal manipulators know how to use words to control perceptions and influence behaviors. They can make victims doubt their own memories and judgments through techniques like gaslighting, denying events that clearly occurred or insisting that situations were different from what they really were. Verbal manipulation can also involve the use of ambiguous language that can be interpreted in multiple ways, allowing the manipulator to deny malicious intentions while still causing harm. They are masters at using tone of voice, body language, and context to convey messages that their words apparently do not say. Curses and words of death. In many cultures, including the biblical one, there is a belief in the power of spoken words to bring good or evil. Words of cursing, contempt, and death are seen as having real spiritual power to affect victims. Even in modern cultures that do not officially believe in the supernatural power of words, the psychological impact of extremely negative words can be profound. People who are constantly subjected to severe criticism, verbal contempt, and discouraging words may begin to internalize these messages, leading to low self-esteem, lack of confidence, and a sense of hopelessness about the future. Envy as the spiritual root of verbal attacks. Envy deserves special attention as the primary spiritual root behind many verbal attacks and slander. Understanding the nature of envy and how it operates can help both victims and observers identify and combat this destructive force. The spiritual nature of envy. In Scripture, envy is described not just as a human emotion, but as a spiritual force with demonic origin. James 3 verses 14 to 16 warns, "But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your hearts, do not boast and be false to the truth. This is not the wisdom that comes down from above, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there will be disorder and every vile practice." This passage reveals that envy is not simply a human character flaw, but is connected to malignant spiritual forces. When we allow envy to take root in our hearts, we open doors to negative spiritual influences that can drive us to destructive actions. Envy is also described as rottenness to the bones, Proverbs 14 verse 30, indicating that it not only harms others but also destroys the person who harbors it. Envious people often experience deteriorated physical and mental health due to the constant bitterness and resentment they carry. How envy manifests. Envy rarely presents itself openly. Instead, it disguises itself under various socially acceptable forms. Excessive constructive criticism. Envious people often present themselves as being concerned with the victim's well-being or growth, but their suggestions are consistently negative and discouraging. Minimization of achievements. When someone they envy achieves success, envious people try to diminish the importance of the achievement, attribute it to luck, or suggest it was obtained through questionable means. Constant comparisons. Envious people make frequent comparisons between themselves and their victims, usually in ways that highlight their own virtues while implicitly criticizing others. Spreading concerns. They share their concerns about the victim with others, effectively spreading doubts and suspicions while maintaining an appearance of care. The group dynamic of envy. Envy becomes particularly dangerous when it operates within groups, whether families, churches, workplaces, or communities. An envious person can influence others to share their negative feelings, creating a toxic group dynamic. This phenomenon is observed in bullying situations where an initially envious person recruits others to participate in systematic attacks against the victim. Secondary participants may not feel personal envy, but are influenced by the original envious person to participate in the attacks. Group dynamics can also create an echo effect, where rumors and criticisms are repeated and amplified within the group, gaining apparent credibility through repetition rather than through real evidence. The therapeutic power of prayer. Why Psalm 140 works. Psalm 140 is not just an interesting historical text. It functions as a powerful therapeutic and spiritual tool for those who face verbal attacks and slander. Understanding why and how this prayer works can increase its effectiveness. Validation of the suffering experience. One of the most healing aspects of Psalm 140 is how it completely validates the experience of those who suffer verbal attacks. David does not minimize the pain caused by malicious words nor suggest that the victim should simply get over the situation. Instead, he acknowledges that words can be like serpents with venom of asps. This validation is crucial for healing because victims of verbal attacks often feel isolated and question whether their pain is legitimate. Well-meaning counselors often minimize the impact of words with phrases like, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me." Psalm 140 recognizes that this perspective is false. Words can cause deep and lasting wounds. Transfer of burden to God. The psalm teaches an effective transfer of the emotional burden from the victim to God. Instead of carrying alone the weight of injustice, anger, and desire for revenge, the person who prays this psalm is delivering these burdens to God. This transfer is not merely symbolic, it has real psychological and spiritual effects. Psychologically, prayer allows a form of emotional processing that reduces internal stress. Instead of constantly ruminating about attacks and planning responses, the mind can find rest knowing that the situation has been delivered to a higher authority. Spiritually, the transfer allows the person to avoid the sins of bitterness and revenge that often accompany situations of injustice. As God assumes responsibility for justice, the victim is freed from the need to settle scores personally. Reorientation of perspective. Psalm 140 helps reorient the victim's perspective in several important ways. From temporal to eternal, the psalm reminds that there is a spiritual reality that transcends immediate circumstances. Problems that seem overwhelming in temporal perspective are placed in the context of eternal divine purposes. From victimization to empowerment, while acknowledging the reality of suffering, the psalm does not leave the person in a position of helpless victim. They are taught to pray actively against the forces that attack them, assuming a posture of spiritual combat. From focus on enemies to focus on God. Instead of being obsessed with the people who attack them, the victim learns to focus on God as their source of protection, justice, and restoration. Activation of faith and hope. The structure of the psalm takes the one who prays through a journey of faith that culminates in declarations of confidence and hope. This progression is not accidental. It reflects a therapeutic process that moves the person from despair to hope. Faith is activated through declarations like, "You are my God," and reminders of past protection. "You covered my head in the day of battle." These declarations are not just mental affirmations, they are acts of faith that invite divine intervention. Hope is cultivated through the final promises of the psalm that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted, and that the righteous shall give thanks, and the upright shall dwell in the presence of God. These promises offer a vision of the future that transcends present circumstances. Practical applications. How to use Psalm 140 today. For Psalm 140 to be effective as a tool of prayer and spiritual protection, it is important to understand how to apply it practically to modern situations. Here are specific guidelines for using this psalm in different contexts. Identifying appropriate situations. Psalm 140 is particularly appropriate for situations involving slander and defamation, whether personal or professional, coordinated attacks on social media or digital environments, a malicious gossip in religious or social communities, a verbal bullying at school, work, or other environments, a psychological manipulation by individuals or groups, attempts to destroy reputation or relationships, a verbal attacks motivated by envy or competition, is situations where words are used as weapons to control or intimidate. Preparation for prayer. Before using Psalm 140 as prayer, it is important to prepare the heart and mind adequately. Examine your own motivation. Make sure you are not being moved by desire for personal revenge, but by a genuine desire for protection and justice. Pray asking God to purify your motivations. Forgive when possible. Although the psalm allows expression of righteous anger, it is important not to harbor bitterness. Pray asking God to help you forgive your enemies while still seeking protection from their attacks. Seek wisdom. Ask God to show you if there is anything in your own behavior that may have contributed to the situation and if there are practical actions you need to take beyond prayer. Methods of prayer with Psalm 140. Daily personal prayer. Read the Psalms slowly, pausing to meditate on each verse. Personalize the language for your specific situation, mentioning by name, if appropriate, those who attack you. Prayer with fasting. For particularly severe situations, consider combining prayer of Psalm 140 with fasting, demonstrating seriousness in your search for divine intervention. Corporate prayer. If others are facing similar situations, pray together using the psalm as a guide. Group prayer can be particularly powerful for breaking spiritual strongholds behind organized attacks. Written prayer. Write your own version of Psalm 140, adapting it to your specific situation. This can help process emotions and articulate specific requests to God. Following prayer with practical actions. Although Psalm 140 is primarily about prayer and dependence on God, this does not mean we should be passive in the face of attacks. Document evidence. If you are facing slander or defamation, keep records of conversations, messages, or publications that may be relevant to your defense. Seek wise counsel. Look for trusted counselors, whether pastors, therapists, or lawyers, depending on the nature of the situation. Take protective measures. This may include adjusting privacy settings on social networks, avoiding certain people or places, or implementing other security measures. Respond with wisdom. When it is necessary to respond to accusations, do so with wisdom, truth, and moderation. Avoid retaliation that could escalate the situation. Case studies, Psalm 140 in action. To illustrate the practical application of Psalm 140, let us consider several real-life situations where this psalm can be particularly effective. Case 1. Workplace bullying. Maria is a competent professional who recently received a significant promotion. Since then, a colleague who was also competing for the position has initiated a subtle sabotage campaign. He spreads rumors about how she obtained the promotion, questions her decisions in meetings, and tries to undermine her authority with the team. Application of Psalm 140. Maria can use verses 4 to 5 that speak about enemies who plan to trip up my feet and set traps. She can pray specifically asking for protection against attempts to sabotage her work and reputation. The final verses about God maintaining the cause of the afflicted can give her confidence that her competence will be recognized and protected. Case 2. Social media attacks. John is a Christian leader who expressed an opinion on a controversial subject. He became the target of a coordinated campaign of attacks on social networks, including threats, character defamation, and attempts to harm his ministry by contacting his church and employer. Application of Psalm 140. John can identify with the psalm's images about enemies who stir up wars continually and have venom of asps under their lips. He can pray asking that the mischief of their own lips turn against his attackers, and trust in the promise that the slanderer will not be established in the land. Case 3. Church gossip. Anna is an active member of her church who recently went through a difficult divorce. Some members began spreading gossip about the circumstances of the divorce, speculating about her guilt and questioning her Christian character. This situation has left her isolated and hurt within her own faith community. Application of Psalm 140. Anna can find comfort in the psalm's validation of the real pain caused by tongues sharp as serpents. She can pray for protection of her reputation and for an end to gossip, trusting in the promise that God will execute justice for the needy. Case 4. Family envy. Carlos is a successful businessman whose success has caused envy in his own family. Relatives make sarcastic comments about his prosperity, spread stories about him having forgotten his roots, and try to sabotage his family relationships through manipulation and triangulation. Application of Psalm 140. Carlos can use the psalm to pray against the spirit of envy that is dividing his family. He can ask for protection against the snares of family manipulation and trust in God's promise to maintain the cause of those who seek righteousness. The spiritual warfare dimension. Psalm 140 operates not only on the human level but also in the realm of spiritual warfare. Understanding this dimension can enhance the effectiveness of using this psalm as a weapon against malicious tongues and the spiritual forces behind them. Recognizing spiritual dynamics. Behind many verbal attacks and campaigns of slander, there are spiritual forces at work. Ephesians 6 verse 12 reminds us that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. When people engage in systematic campaigns of verbal destruction, they often become instruments of darker spiritual forces. The coordination, persistence, and malicious creativity often displayed in such attacks suggest influences beyond normal human motivation. Psalm 140 acknowledges this spiritual dimension by addressing not just human enemies but the evil forces that empower them. David's language about evil men and violent men can be understood as referring both to human agents and spiritual entities working through them. Breaking spiritual strongholds. Prolonged campaigns of verbal attack can create spiritual strongholds, areas where evil forces gain a foothold and exercise influence. These strongholds can manifest as persistent patterns of false accusation that seem to have a life of their own, environments where gossip and slander flourish despite efforts to stop them, situations where lies are believed despite clear evidence to the contrary, communities where envious spirits seem to infect multiple people simultaneously. Psalm 140 can be used to break these strongholds by invoking divine intervention against the spiritual forces maintaining them. The Psalm's declarations of God's sovereignty and justice directly challenge the authority of these evil forces. Prophetic declarations. The final verses of Psalm 140 function as prophetic declarations that proclaim God's ultimate victory over the forces of evil. When we pray these verses with faith, we are not just making requests. We are declaring spiritual realities that have the power to manifest in the physical realm. I know that the Lord will maintain the cause of the afflicted, is not wishful thinking. It is a declaration of divine character and commitment. Such declarations, made in faith, release spiritual power that can change circumstances and defeat enemy plans. Long-term effects and testimonies. The consistent use of Psalm 140 as a weapon against verbal attacks produces long-term effects that go beyond immediate protection. Understanding these effects can encourage persistence in prayer even when immediate results are not apparent. Character development. Regular prayer with Psalm 140 develops several important character qualities. Spiritual maturity. Learning to entrust justice to God rather than seeking personal revenge develops spiritual maturity and emotional stability. Faith and trust. Repeatedly declaring God's faithfulness and justice strengthens faith and deepens trust in divine providence. Wisdom and discernment. The process of identifying and praying against spiritual attacks develops wisdom and spiritual discernment. Compassion. Experiencing God's protection and justice can develop compassion for others who face similar attacks. Restoration and vindication. Many who consistently use Psalm 140 report eventual restoration of reputation and relationships that were damaged by verbal attacks. This restoration often comes in unexpected ways and timing, but it demonstrates God's faithfulness to His promises. Vindication may not always come in the form expected, but God's justice is ultimately revealed. Sometimes attackers are exposed and discredited. Sometimes their own words and actions eventually reveal their true character. Sometimes circumstances change in ways that clearly demonstrate divine intervention. Transformation of enemies. In some remarkable cases, persistent prayer with Psalm 140 has led to the transformation of enemies. Hearts hardened by envy and malice can be softened by divine grace. Those who once attacked with their tongues may become allies and even friends. This transformation is not guaranteed and should not be the primary motivation for prayer, but it demonstrates the unlimited power of God to change human hearts and situations. Conclusion. The enduring power of ancient wisdom. Psalm 140 stands as a testament to the enduring power of biblical wisdom to address contemporary challenges. Though written over 3 millennia ago, its insights into human nature, spiritual warfare, and divine justice remain remarkably relevant to modern situations. In our age of digital communication and viral misinformation, the weapons described in this psalm have become more powerful and far-reaching than ever before. Yet the spiritual principles and protective power contained in this ancient prayer remain equally effective. The psalm teaches us that words have real power, power to wound, destroy, and kill. But it also teaches us that there is a higher power available to those who seek protection and justice. God's power to deliver the oppressed and vindicate the righteous transcends all human schemes and spiritual attacks. For those who face the pain of verbal assault, character assassination, or malicious gossip, Psalm 140 offers more than comfort, it offers a weapon. When prayed with faith, understanding, and persistence, this ancient prayer becomes a shield against modern attacks and a sword to cut through the deceptions of the enemy. The testimony of countless believers throughout history confirms the effectiveness of this psalm. In generation after generation, those who have cried out to God using David's words have found protection, justice, and ultimate victory over their accusers and attackers. As we face an uncertain future where the power of malicious words continues to grow, Psalm 140 remains a source of hope and strength. Its promises are as reliable today as they were 3,000 years ago, and its power to deliver the oppressed remains unchanged. May all who read these words find in Psalm 140 not just historical interest, but practical power for the battles they face. And may they discover, as David did, that no weapon formed against them shall prosper, and every tongue that rises against them in judgment shall be condemned, for this is the heritage of the servants of the Lord.